Just because you have an understanding of the Bible in your head doesn't necessarily mean that you have Jesus in your heart.
Get right, get inside, get hungry, got appetite. Everlasting water, never get thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey.
You are listening to Chad Schaefer on Disputed Lands.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. It is time for Disputed Lands. I am your host, Chad Schaefer. It is Monday night, and it is Take on the World TV. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Looks like I got a bunch of you already out there. I've been chatting with you. It's always good to have you on. Ian will not be joining us tonight, taking care of the family. They were sick a week before, and he's taking the night off. That's just fine. I think Gary and I are going to try to carry this conversation here going forward. I kind of gave you a little hint, though it was late in the evening. I usually get that posted like 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Gary. Just didn't happen today. I posted it like an hour ago, who was going to be the guest. So I gave them no time to prepare. But what you need to do is you just need to go to Genesis 6 Conspiracy, the website. Let me see. Let me get it on the screen. You guys should know this already by now, I'm sure, but I'm going to put it on the screen anyway. You go, you buy this book from Gary in Canada. You pay a little more, have it shipped to you, and get his autograph. It's well worth his autograph. You can go to Amazon and just to look up Genesis 6 Conspiracy. I'll do the same. But in case you didn't know, look at this, how thick this thing is. That's like a 2 years reading a chapter every night or chapter a week or something. It'll take you a little while. But if you have the book, you should open up to, I believe it's chapter 10. And tonight, Gary, I prompted you a little bit. I said, you know what, tonight, let's talk about something I haven't heard you talk about in a lot of your interviews. And we're going to talk about Enochian Mysticism. That's a big word. What is Enochian Mysticism?
You know, it is a big word, and there's a lot of details into it that, you know, we're going to get into and tell some of the nuances and things, but it is one of those more important terms in terms of understanding our world, our history, and what's going to happen in the end times. So if people really want to get a good feel, they need to understand what Enochian mysticism is, because it answers a lot of questions to what we've seen, what we see today, and what we've seen in the past, and what we're going to see in the future. So the first word, Enochian, comes from Enoch. And Enoch is, there's 2 Enochs in the Bible. So it's one of the first things that you need to get clear if you're going to not get confused with a lot of the misinformation out there and not be led down a garden path. So you have Enoch, son of Cain, and you have Enoch, son of Jared of the Seth line, and they're 2 completely different individuals. And a lot of people just sort of skip over that detail. And the reason why it's important is because Gnostics and people worldwide and secret societies, Enoch is one of their great patriarchs. So you need to understand which one that they're talking about. And so Enoch, son of Cain, go ahead.
Well, you know, when I was growing up and reading the Bible and reading all the scriptures, I have to be honest here. None of my teachers or pastors or anybody ever really pointed out to me that there were 2 Enochs. So you can imagine my surprise when 10 years ago, for the very first time in my whole life, you know, reading the Bible for myself, I was like, wait a second. This is not the same Enoch. It says son of this person, and this one says son of this person. And you see that happen several times throughout the Bible, especially in the early lineages.
Yeah. So we need to understand those names, and even in both lines, you get a lot of names that are similar, like you have a Lamech in both lines.
Right.
And then you've got names like that have a very, very similar pronunciation. So if you weren't very, very clear on it, and when you get transliterations all around the world with different spellings, and they look very, very close, that if you don't understand who they're talking about and the differences, is they have the ability, and when I talk about they, I'm talking about the spurious forces and all of those that are working for Satan, that they're going to conflate things in a way that they're trying to lead you away from God and open the door to give you ideas and concepts that aren't monotheist or Christian. And so we need to understand that there's two Enochs, and it's very, very important. And Enoch is, is the founder of secret societies, but we're not quite there yet in terms of explaining this thing.
Yeah,
but it's
so
the
go
secret
ahead. I
societies.
didn't mean to interrupt, but it was just it's the point. I think that if I'm not being arrogant, I'm saying if I missed it, I just wonder how many people out there who have been raised in the church also missed that.
A lot have missed it, and I get emails all the time saying, "I just bought your book. I'm just a few chapters in it, and I really hate what you're saying about Enoch, and I'm not sure whether I should read on." So I send an email back or a message back, and I say, I wrote the beginning of the book in that way to cement home what I think is a very, very important detail, and how the dark forces conflate the two. And I said, but if you read on, you're going to be fine with it, and then you're going to say, maybe I should, I should have known that.
Hang in there. Hang in there. It'll be okay.
It's going to get a little bit worse yet, but then it's going to get better. But
it'll be okay.
And I went back and forth on, should I do that or should I not do that? But again, I mean, I go back to what you just said, that how many people just don't understand it, and so when they're reading Enochian literature, they need to understand then what type of lens ought to I be reading it, whether it's First Enoch or Second Enoch or Third Enoch or Enoch Book of Giants, so that you've got your red flags up as to what they're talking about. And any of the other apocryphal books, let's say like Jubilees, should I be wondering whether or not which Enoch that they're talking about? And hopefully that also leads people to learn as much as they can about what I would call the ecclesiastical or the good Enoch, that's the son of Jared of the Seth line. And so the second word to Enochian mysticism is the word mysticism, and that's the mystical religions. And so when we're talking about Enochian mysticism, we're talking about a religion that is going to be created before the flood, before the giants come along, and who is the son of Cain, and he's going to create a religion that early on. And if we understand who Cain is that he is the one who rebelled against God, killed his brother, was ostracized to Nod, and builds a city and names the first city after his son Enoch. And all of this is expressing some significant knowledge here, because not only was he an agrarian under Adam, and Adam was an agrarian in Eden before being ostracized, and all the knowledge that you need to have to understand how to do that, whether it's astronomy or all the other skills and knowledge that you need to be successful at this, he is somehow successful at building cities. And of course, there's another rabbit hole of building cities for who, but let's just leave it with cities at this point.
Yeah, we'll try to stay focused.
Let's try to stay focused, because we could easily go 1,000 different ways and have a lot of fun and maybe confuse a lot of people. But that's not what we're here to do. We're here not to confuse people. So,
not tonight, anyway.
What the polytheists believe about Enoch is that he learned knowledge that was passed on from Adam to Cain. And then Enoch splits this knowledge into 7 different disciplines that we would know today as the 7 liberal arts, and as I call it in the craft, it's the 7 sacred sciences. And this knowledge is going to be looked upon as it's being developed by Enoch, who really takes it to a whole new level than what Cain did. Not only just developing it into the 7 disciplines, but they make a very key decision at this point that this knowledge should not be available to the poor, the mundane. It should only be available for the rich and the powerful. This is going to be a really, really important concept when this marries up with the illicit knowledge from heaven, from the Watchers, and you're going to create the giants, who are going to be part of this antediluvian organizational structure that's going to parade the world into apocalypse. And so what they do is they create secret societies and mystery schools to develop this knowledge and to keep it hidden and away and secret from the people that don't want to have it, the Sethites and the poor. And they create this mystical religion, which is, I call Enochian Mysticism. And it's also what the Essenes call it, is Enochian Mysticism. And this is the original polytheist religion that crosses the flood, that shows up at Babel, which we understand in the end time as Babylon. And so that is set up in the same hierarchical organizational structure as the secret societies. It's just that the second thing that Enoch does is he now introduces rituals and ceremonies in the worship and the protection of this knowledge. And this knowledge is now being aided by the Watchers and fallen angels. So it's being developed in the disciplines. And this is where you get all of the initiations and the rituals of mysticism that have plagued the world ever since. And what's interesting about the name Enoch is that you have two different meanings to the name Enoch. One is from the spurious sides and one is from the Hebrew version. So typically we would understand Enoch as consecrated. So, typically holy, and that would be, I think, applicable to Enoch of the Sethian line. But it is translated as initiated from the polytheists. And of course, you have to be initiated into the secret societies and or into the mystical religions that's going to teach you this knowledge to a level where you're going to become first level adept at 3rd degree in the old system or 33rd degree in the newer, latter Scottish Rite division. But there are many degrees higher than that. But this is the sun worshipping cult that is introduced by Enoch, son of Cain, in basically the 3rd generation and 2nd generation after coming out of Eden. So it affects the world right out of the gate.
I want to read this scriptures that you chose to start this chapter off with. I thought it very appropriate. You'll have to tell me, maybe you remember what version or translation this is, but I'm just going to read it. This is Isaiah 47, verses 10 and 13. But it says, "You have trusted in your wickedness and have said, 'No one sees me.' Your wisdom and knowledge misled you when you say to yourself, 'I am, and then there is none besides me.'" I'm going to come back to that. "All the counsel you have received has only worn you out. Let your astrologers come forward, those stargazers who make predictions month by month." Now, it's very interesting, Gary. I don't know if you knew this, but it says, this particular verse that says, "I am, and there is no one besides me," is actually kind of a mockery of the translation where we see in the scriptures, it says, "Who do you say that you are when we call upon you?" And he responds, "I am that I am," right? That the name that Yahweh, which we would say, which was only used once in the temples, right? That's the only time they ever said it. They wouldn't write it. They wouldn't, whatever, say Adonai, right? They would say Adonai. You go on to describe that in this chapter here. And I didn't want to jump ahead of you, but I found that so intriguing, this verse, and how it is actually him saying, "You mock me." And it says, "All the counsels you received have worn you out." Your astrologers come forward, those stargazers who make predictions month by month. I mean, Isaiah just calls them to the carpet here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's such an enlightening, defining understanding of what the mystical religions are and some of the issues with the religion. That's the New International Version, 1973. And I use that one because it's in plain language, because I'm trying to attract people to the faith as well and give them a good sort of plain language as opposed to King James Version. And it's also the Bible I came back to God with. So it has.
I really liked it.
Yeah.
So go on with where you were. I just wanted to put that.
Well, now I want to just sort of underline what Enoch does is he creates the zodiac and astrology that Isaiah is talking about.
Right, which would
And
be an altered version of the starts with an M. It's escaping me. The because the Hebrews have a name for it too. But go ahead.
yeah, they do. I'm not sure what it is either off the top of my head. So anyways, he creates the zodiac, which, astrology is based on, and he creates a sun worshiping religion that's not just worshiping of the sun and, Satan being representative of the sun, but he is using a solar calendar. And just as the book of Jubilees, which is apocryphal, is going to talk about Enoch and converting everything to a solar year, he is directly going against what the Sethites are being taught, and then what Israel is going to be taught after the flood, and what type of calendar to use. He's going to supplant that with a solar year that's going to totally fit into their sun worshiping religion in all sorts of aspects, as opposed to a lunar calendar that the Sethites and what the Israelites would use. So this is establishing all of the differences that, people want to know, where does the expression "nothing new under the sun" comes from? That goes right back to the beginning that the Bible is talking about, that nothing is new. And so this is the religion that not only partners with the Nephilim in the end time, it is the religion that is used to persecute the Sethites of that period and Noah, and that it is the religion that is going to be used to enslave humankind and try and corrupt them and destroy them from the face of the earth. And except for the flood, and Noah being selected and his family as the 8 to survive for another start, they would have ensured the Adamites could not receive the destiny that God had created them for in Eden. And so this is the whole beginning of that. And who better to do that than the descendants of Cain, because he's been ostracized. So he wants the Sethites to be completely destroyed and corrupted and inherit everything himself, because he'd be the only legitimate line at that point in time.
In thinking about that, you talk about the Enoch being taught by Cain, we presume, who learned this from Adam, about these 7 sacred sciences. When you talk about the 7 sacred sciences, to use their language, I guess in English, the purpose for providing that information is that it contains within those 7 sacred sciences what we would call the known laws, or the governing of the universe, its foundations, the rules for its operation. Is that correct?
Yes, and typically the breakdown isn't anything that is extraordinary by its name. I mean, we know it today as it has always been. You have grammar, and you have rhetoric, and you have dialectics, and that's going to be the 3 that is going to create an extension of the 7 sacred sciences, and these 3 in particular of philosophy, which is going to guide their religion. So when you hear about the philosophy in university, or the philosophies coming out of Greeks, it comes from the sophists and back to Enochian mysticism, and is the theocratic or theological doctrine that guides the 7 sciences, right? Science is not separated from religion. It's guided by its religion. That's where it comes from. And the other ones would be, arithmetic, geometry, which in the craft they call masonry, music, and astronomy, from which astrology is, comes out of. And what's interesting is a lot of people say, well, okay, that's fine, but I don't really find any of that in the Bible. And I kind of come back and say, well, it is, but you have to look for it to a certain degree, but it hints at it more than anything. So back in the time of Lamech, of a descendant of Enoch, son of Cain, he has 4 offspring that are recorded in the Bible. That's Nama, female. That's Tubal-Cain, that is a Jubal and a Jubal. And what's interesting about that is in the Bible, we understand that Tubal-Cain forged tools and bronze and iron and taught that to people like the Kenites. What's really interesting about that is Tubal-Cain is another significant patriarch of the secret societies and the polytheist religions and the Gnostic religions. And Nama, she's not noted for anything in the Bible, but in their version, she's the one that created a lot of the craft arts like weaving and the offspring crafts like that, and married Nephilim to create offspring. And Jubal is the creator of music, and Jubal creates masonry or geometry that is going to be used in their belief system to build the great megaliths and the pyramids to honor their pantheon of gods. And this is the knowledge that is also marries up with the illicit knowledge from the fallen angels that accelerates it at a significant level in the time of Lamech and his offspring.
So let me ask you this. I know I'm backtracking just a little bit about the names, and I'm sorry for leaving there for a little bit. My internet is being, as a word that Gary likes, spurious. I'm just poking a little fun at my friend. It's okay. It's okay. But so we see these descendants. We talked a little bit about the names in being mimicked on first. The good line, the follower of Yah, those who are abiding by his instructions. Their names, they're being mocked in a way. Confusion already being added by the evil line naming their kids exactly the same names at the same time. So we already see this deviousness of confusion being sown. But as you go on in this chapter, and as you described, you mentioned several names there where we have more ancient names. They're much older names that then we have different names essentially meaning the same thing as their predecessors, oftentimes sounding the same. So let me ask you this. When we see these different names and there's sometimes confusion about them, is it talking of, let's say we have other names within them. We have Osiris. We talked about, I think you mentioned Unana, which is the god of the Mesopotamians, where we get the Anu, Unanu, or Anunnaki. So when we talk about these people, do you think that it is the same spirit that is influencing a character or a person at that, or is it just a different person acting in the same manner that ends up causing that confusion? I don't know if I'm being clear with that question, but it's one of the things that bounces around in my head. So maybe these people understand that, yes, I mean it when I'm a little slow sometimes. So is it the same spirit that is influencing these people to cause them to become famous, their fame to spread? How do you think that that's working? And I'm not sure I'm even being clear with that question. If I'm not, just say so. Well, that's fine. These guys know.
I think so, because you have, like Enoch would be very, very famous, right? And he was also famous among many different nations. But you have in sort of the more post-Diluvian history of names, because we don't get a lot of names out of pre-flood. But let's say if you talk about Confucius or Buddha or Hermes, and this list of people that they say are sent to humankind to help them evolve into godhood. This is a common spirit in terms of their understanding it, that it is a avatar concept. So that comes out of the Eastern religions. So you would have, let's say Buddha would be an avatara of Vishnu. And Vishnu enters into Buddha when he's a child and provides additional knowledge and wisdom, and is there to guide people to evolve into godhood as their belief system is. So if that's what you're talking about, I think there is those common spirits that are helping the polytheists along all throughout history and even before the flood. And I would also suggest that even today, when you're at the adept level, you're talking as a Rosicrucian or of one of the polytheist religions, you are in conversion and communication with the celestial ascended masters and the Great White Brotherhood and the 1,000 different names there, that they're continuing to at least communicate with them. And some of them, continue to try and have angels, fallen angels, enter them to give them this extra wisdom. A lot of them will receive a demon instead, which is not going to help them in quite the way that they want. But both of those things are going on. So if that's what you're talking about, I would say, yes, there's a common spirit like an Antichrist spirit that is at work and play there.
Very good. I knew that's what you meant. I knew that's where you were going. But when those thoughts bounce around in my head early on in this research, trying to ask it in a manner I remember asking in my head to kind of lead you here in this direction, because you do write about that in this chapter. And I was forgetting where I read here. Oh, yeah, you said it's actually on page 67. And you said there were, of course, distinct degrees of deception. The lesser mysteries could be revealed without fear of incrimination through public ceremonies and rituals immersed in allegories. Just kind of what you were talking about here. So I think that's kind of explains that. Why rituals? Why rituals? Why introduce these?
Because they're trying to keep the information in an oral tradition, and they don't want a lot of this written down on the higher levels of the secrets. And if you give those secrets out in the old tradition, it's punishable by death. But that typically only happens at the adept level, the third degree of the old York Rite system and the old mystical system, or 33rd degree on the Scottish Rite, where you become an adept. So all of the allegories and the rituals beforehand are giving them some superficial knowledge and direction, and are preparing them in the brainwashing process as they're rising up. But until they become an adept, they don't get the real information, and it's still encoded in allegories and rituals and ceremonies and things like that to keep it encoded, and also in symbols and iconology. So they work a lot with taciturn communication in many of the things that they create, whether it's buildings with sacred geometry and whatever they're creating for
right
sculptures.
In my neck of the woods there, buddy.
Yeah, so it's all part of that whole religious ritual and ceremony. Everything, is an extension thereof, and they've been communicating that way since the beginning of time.
You know how many people would be frightened if I told them right now that they participated in one of these pagan rituals and didn't even know it?
Oh, they'd be shocked, and they don't even know.
They don't even remember when they did it.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about a holiday either.
Yeah.
Graduation, in case you guys don't know, when you graduate, you come in this robe, right? And you get this little hat that has the flat square on the top. This comes straight out of a Freemasonic ritual. The cap is to represent the pestle or the platter from which a mason would hold his cement, right? The caulking, right? And he would use that caulking to build with or build a wall. And then you move the tassel from one side to the other when you graduated to represent the sun coming up and going down, right? This is straight out of pagan Masonic ritual. And you'd be hard pressed to find a Westerner today who didn't participate in this ceremony.
And a ceremony designed to celebrate a certain level or degree of education, understanding that this is a knowledge cult and a knowledge religion. That's what Gnosticism and Gnosis goes back to, is knowledge that goes back to this Enochian mysticism. So, right through any sort of graduation you have in school of any sort, it's going to have a polytheist ritual to it. If you're going to go into court, you're going into polytheist rituals, from the scales and the swearing of oaths and how the court is set up. This is all set up in the ancient polytheist design, as the magistrates that which are part of the rulers of this world. I mean, this is not by coincidence. And you're right. You live in a neighborhood that has buildings that have shocking occult iconology and statues decorating them all over the place, and home of the Freemasons. So I mean,
I think we have, and I mentioned this the last time, but you always remind me of, I'm sorry, but you always remind me of this when we talk, is that we have the largest Scottish Rite cathedral right here in Indianapolis in the United States.
Yeah.
So, I'm bringing this up, and I wanted you to talk about this on the show, not to promote them to be in all of them, but I just think it's wise, just as the scriptures here talk about, is to be aware how much control, influence over day-to-day activities these things exert. And so, to understand them, right, when we know it, we can start to understand how to operate. Why the oppression is around us that it is, Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you always continue. I always want to jump in. So
go right ahead. Jump in.
I'm not always a patient guy.
You can back us up and we can start over. I know I jump ahead, but.
Well, and a lot of people say, well, when and how did this happen? That if what you're saying is true, that they totally control everything and they immerse us in occult imagery and rituals and holidays and things all of the time. How could that have happened? Well, just as they usurped control of the organizational structure for government and religion before the flood, they do this again after the flood, beginning at Babel. And all of the polytheist religions, which are going to control all of the populations on earth until Moses leads Israel out of Egypt and starts monotheism. I mean, this is their world, and they own all of the governments, and they've been imposing this all the way through. And just because you have Christianity come about within one of the metallic dynasties that goes back to the Babel religions and the offspring of the post-Diluvian Rephaim, doesn't mean that they're ever going to be free of all of that history and iconology. So when Constantine comes to power in 312, he's merging Mithricism with Christianity, where you get all of that idolatry and symbolism coming in right from the beginning of Christianity being a state religion. And anytime I think you're a state religion, you are going to be corrupted by the state.
Well, I mean, it's corrupt in its inception. It's not good seed to begin with, And somebody mentioned this, Gary, in the chat. Let me back up so I can get it right here. Something close. Be careful. People will be renouncing their graduations. Good friend Marley. And here's the truth of it, Gary. You would have to renounce your graduations. You where you bank. You would have to begin with all this. Much of the actual English language is a bastardized language that has many of its roots, even in words that are used every day, in an occultic pagan origin.
Yes.
So if you want to avoid the occult and renounce all of it, the best thing you can do is sit in your house on your couch, not go anywhere or talk to anybody, because that's going to be the only way you can avoid any participation. And that's not what we're called to do. So I want to make that point, that it's unavoidable because of the masters of this world right now. But
we're immersed with it. And again, to underscore some of the things that you were saying, but also make clear to listeners, is I don't look at knowledge as being evil. It's what you do with that knowledge which makes it good or evil.
Yeah, be wise.
So, but the trouble is knowledge always is a two-edged sword. So, and the knowledge that the polytheists are using it for are to lead people away from God. They're using it to not give God credit for anything. They're using it to degrade God, and they're also using it to honor their pantheon. And that's exactly what happens in all of the education systems that we have today. And when you talk about the English language that is not free, I mean, all of this and the modern King James Version Bible is kind of the offspring of an individual named Francis Bacon, who was a Rosicrucian, who created the Knights of the Helmet Society and the Spear Shaker Society to gather the best literary poets and writers of that time to develop the English language, which you have like Shakespeare coming out of and writing the plays and making popular the new English language that is going to be the language that then is commissioned by King James Stewart to create the King James Version Bible. That's
Right.
None of that is a coincidence. So when you say things like the etymology and the base for the words that were used to change this from Old English, it was not an evolution. It was a contrived invention
plan.
with purposeful plan with the meanings that they wanted to honor their polytheist religion.
And it was basically the same goal as before. A lot of people realize, and really we've seen much of their aim take place, is they wanted a new language, a one language that would be spoken by everyone throughout the world. I mean,
Yes.
This is the goal, to undo the confusion of the languages. And
Yes. To create a new Babel.
To create a new
with one
Babel.
language. Yes.
They've been widely successful because other than America, most other countries teach the children growing up English alongside their own language.
Right.
So many of them are bilingual in other
Yes.
countries, and even in poorest countries are bilingual.
Yeah. And Francis Bacon is the one who's the inspirational founder, and his painting hangs as one of three in the entrance to the Royal Society, which was the creation of modern science that got control of all of the education and science, and all of those organizations report to the Royal Society, also known by its Rosicrucian name, the Invisible College, because Rosicrucians and Freemasons created that as what they call themselves, the first of the scientists and the last of the sorcerers. And Francis Bacon also wrote New Atlantis, which the Royal Society was based on, which is a world government that has one language, that has one religion, that works in harmony with science, and one world government. And the Atlantis goes back to their root belief system as Atlantis being the golden civilization and the helm of world government in the time of Enoch, with Enoch being one of their great patriarchs. And the religion of Atlantis has black magic and astrology and all sorts of things that, they attribute Enoch for inventing.
Yeah, what always blows me away, Gary, in talking about these kind of subjects is how simple the plan really is on the basic level for the control. We see it in practice today, the giving of knowledge without the understanding.
Yes.
The reasoning behind it. This is what you need to know. This is how to make this work. But the underlying understanding, the roots, the foundations of why these things work, how these things work, the rules that the underlying, base is on, controlling education. It sounds like such an easy sentence to say. Controlling education is 2 words. And at its basic level, you think, well, what can that do? Well, I mean, look at how society has been steered by those 2 simple words.
Yep. Yeah. It has been totally manipulated, and now it's used for total preparation for what is not that far off with the end time, something that they want to bring on. And so education, in terms of what they teach you, how they teach it, and what they don't teach you, what's behind, is pretty much like giving the lower mysteries in one of the polytheist temples and religions, because they never teach them the true meanings, but
Right.
they give them enough to corrupt them and to control them, which is the goal, and to brainwash them.
Right. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hijack where you were going with that. But you, in this chapter, you talk about then how it's not just the English, but you were talking about here, backing up. I'll just give a rundown here. You said Japheth was a seed for most of the northern Mediterranean societies of antiquity, stretching into the Celtic-dominated lands of Europe, including in the descendants of Japheth were the Greeks and the Romans, who, along with all the other descendants of Japheth, also eagerly supported and nurtured the disparate forms of the mystical religions. And we can see that in the different languages and words that we have for these things, even today now in the American language, but all based on a model designed in Egypt by Hermes. And this is what I was talking about. A lot of people think that Enoch, the evil, is Hermes, but that's not true, is it?
You know, when you talk about Hermes, you have to say, okay, which Hermes are we talking about?
This is what I'm talking about.
Exactly, because they just don't tend to talk. They talk about Hermes as separate individuals and then as a conflated amount. So that's where the term Hermes Trismegistus comes from, like the three times Hermes. And when you break that down, you've got Hermes as being in two different sort of variations of it. One is where he is a god like Thoth, and another where he is like Enoch before the flood. And then you have, after the flood, somebody by the name of Hermes who discovers the two pillars of Lamech that directs him to the knowledge of the religion and the knowledge buried under the pyramids after the flood. That takes that back to Nimrod, which is where the knowledge to build Babel City comes from, and that Babel religion comes from. And then another one that's related to alchemy down the road. So whichever one that you're referring to is they usually pick one of those three. So he's not always a god, but typically as you get into the Enochian aspect of it, in terms of the mystical part, it comes back together that Enoch is actually raised to be a god in their belief system from the knowledge that he has developed, pioneered, and then been provided by the fallen angels. And his name is changed in Third Enoch, which is why we need to understand which versions you're reading about when it talks about Enoch. And his name he's raised to an angelic level, and his name is Metatron, that people give credit today is the angelic figure that is leading scientists in the development of AI and quantum computing and all of these other developments. So Enoch is probably a combination of all of that, but to separate it out is you have an antediluvian Enoch in most of the standard version, whether or not he's elevated to a godhood status like a Mercury or a Thoth, depending on which version that you're reading. And you have one that's after the flood, that is working with Nimrod and starts, the mystery schools and everything's after the flood, particularly through Egypt, because he travels with Mizraim after Babel over to Egypt, and then one that comes a little bit later. And he's called by many names in the religions. So in the Quran, he's called Idris. Again, it's hard to tell in the Quran which one that they're referring to at times. And in Phoenician, he's called Tot or Thought, depending on how you want to, whether you want to pronounce the H or not. In Greece, he was known as Mercury's or Hermes. He's known as both. Sufis also Idris, and also with the Arabs as Edris, which is very, very similar to Idris. So he's known all around the Mediterranean by different names. And in Egypt, he's thought of as Hermes and Thoth. So this is an individual after the flood that is part of all of those mystical religions. But again, that makes sense if you understand what happens at Babel, because Nimrod stays in Sumer or Shinar in Mesopotamia, and Mizraim goes to Egypt, and those are the two pillars of Enochian mysticism that are going to spread around the world. So the Egyptian version goes around the Mediterranean. The Sumerian one goes into the Indus Valley and then over into China and over into Japan. And those are the two pillars that spread around the world, and they're all part of the same root religion. That goes back to Hermes, who is pioneering that information that Enoch originally developed, and then it was stored by Lamech's 4 sons or 4 offspring.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and it's a perfect segue into what you wrote here. I'm just going to read this paragraph. This is, just to be clear, Enochian pantheism that Freemasonry is anchored in is a doctrine denying the personality of God while worshiping gods of different creeds. Pantheism depersonalizes God to a universal life force, to an impersonal energy. The universal life force is pure energy and believed to be the father of creation, allegorized as God, Buddha, the Force, Yahweh, and others. And it is a singularity and an unicity point that sparked the Big Bang. Pantheism, according to the Webster, is derived from the word pantheon, defined as a temple of gods and as a complete mythology. The word pantheon is derived from 2 Greek words, pan meaning all and theos meaning gods. Pantheism is not compatible with the monotheistic religions. So I just thought that was a very good paragraph there to help people understand exactly what Enochian pantheism, Enochian mysticism, which linked to Freemasonry, and why it's so important to understand this discussion we're having tonight. Because understanding these things and understanding what they have influenced, to answer the person's question, does not mean we avoid them. It educates us to understand how then we should act in wisdom in the societies that we're living in. If you understand its roots, even if the person who are in them don't, or more importantly, if you know they do know what they're operating on, helps you to prepare ahead of time in your heart and in your mind. You're going to have a much better footing when speaking and dealing with the people you're facing and talking to and interacting with on an everyday, in an everyday manner, right? I mean, if you have to go to the clerk's office in the court and you see the guy sitting there has a Masonic ring on, you're going to have a little bit more wisdom in how they're operating, what motives they're operating on. Mm-hmm. So you're not caught off guard by the.
Yeah, I mean, we have to understand that we are lambs among wolves, right?
Absolutely.
And therefore we need to learn and put on all of the armor of God so that we can not only fight flesh, but also the spirit that is, that the flesh of this world are answering to. And so we can't escape all of the things that they're doing, but we can have our eyes open so that we can avoid pitfalls, avoid participating in rituals and pagan celebrations to ensure that we're not being deceived, because I mean they're trying to corrupt us and they're trying to lead us away from God, knowingly or unknowingly, all of the time. So what it does do is, though, when you start to wake up and you start to open your eyes and you start to see their language displayed everywhere, how they talk, how they present things, how they do things, how the imagery works everywhere to support what they're doing, it's a bit shocking.
Let me ask you about that, Gary, because
comforting.
You've been very open about this, about your return to the Bible and to the Scriptures, and how you had obviously a deep hunger to understand more that was going on in the Scriptures and around you. What was your thoughts and your reaction as you began to go down these rabbit holes and understand this information? I mean, what was it like to be in Gary Wayne's shoes? Just an honest from the heart
Yeah.
testimony, if I can ask you for that.
Yeah, a lot of different things that are going on and at the same time, and then disappearing and then coming back on. So certainly obsessed, um, to learn more, and that's a lot of my nature. But scared, sometimes being seduced because of what you're reading about, and it sounds really good until you really get in underneath. Um, Fearful that what you're actually, your gut is telling you, and everything about you is telling you, is that this is likely going to be true. You don't want it to be true. So that cognitive dissonance that so many people have to go through. And then thinking, well, I must be crazy. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely know that
Right.
feeling.
And so, there's just so many of those rabbit holes, and you can stay down in those rabbit holes, but at some point in time, you have to come out of that and say, okay, can I make any sense of this? And if I can make some sense of it, then what do I do with it? And the confusion
What,
about what I should do with it, that was really difficult, because I mean, I'm gonna, I end up writing about things that people think I'm crazy.
well,
People within my family, people,
I
within
was,
my
that was
friends are saying
what I was
like,
going to ask you. What was it like for you and your family around you? Because Gary, I'll be honest. People see you. They've listened to you. They've heard your testimony. Many of them here in the chat have read a lot of your book or most of your book. Not all of them, but I want them to. They have a very. They love you. I'm just going to be honest. The people, most of the people in our chat, they just love you, and they were thrilled when you were going to be on here tonight. And they see that and they think, man, Gary must have had it together all along, but he didn't have
oh
to face
no.
any of the things that we've had to face. But the truth is, you mentioned family, how their reaction to when they found out you were writing about this stuff, or if you were talking about this stuff. It wasn't always nice, or probably, and maybe in some cases still isn't for you. Correct?
Yeah, to a certain degree, absolutely. But for the most part, I mean, most people have accepted it. They don't want to deal with aspects of it, obviously. Any conversations that would happen, I mean, I can present a lot of information. Um, I can be quite persuasive, and I can also look at where they're coming from, because I've been there, and start to take apart their positions. So after a while, people say, you know what? I don't want that. I don't want to believe what you're saying. And I've had friends who, they bought the book and they just, got hold of me and said, I'm 200 pages through. This book is just scaring the socks off me, and I'm not going to finish it. There's no way, because I don't want this to be true. But one of the things that became clear to me very quickly was, it can be lonely, or you can look at it and say, but if I can plant just enough seeds for when things start to become clear to them that maybe this guy wasn't a madman, um, they will start to dig deeper and say, hey, wait a minute, he was onto something. And so, that's what kind of gets you through. But I was, fearful when, having my first media interview, in terms of, how was I going to be perceived? How would people take me? And would they just say, no, this, not even pay any attention to it? And so I was actually quite surprised, though, that a lot of what I feared wasn't going to take place. That a lot of people were, and so many people get back to me saying that, for the first time, you're putting things in a way that makes sense to me. I've been looking for some of these answers in the church, wherever, all through my life. And for the first time, the Old Testament makes sense to me now. And questions that I couldn't get answered in the church, you've been able to answer. So it was nice to get sort of that nexus point where you get beyond that concern, and you're more concerned with how many people appreciate your work, as to how many people, let's say, don't. But at the same time, you're planting a lot of seeds. And so even if they don't, accept some of the prehistory stuff, maybe they're going to listen to some of the prophecy stuff, or maybe they're going to make sense of some of the things that they've seen in world history. Or when I go off and people don't like it when I'm doing commentaries on Tolkien and Lewis or Shakespeare or Francis Bacon or the secret societies or whatever, it just starts to hopefully down the road gel for a lot of people out there. And that's the satisfaction that I'm looking for, is just maybe I'm planting some seeds out there.
Hey, Gary, do you enjoy speaking in front of people? Would you like to come and be a speaker at Take on the World this year? We have the date actually scrolling across the bottom. So Gary, if you would take a look at that, it's August 21st through the 23rd. It's going to be in Ohio. So I'm inviting you. I'm not going to put you on the spot to say you have to answer on stream. You are being invited to be a speaker there. These people love you.
I'd love to get there. That's a tough month for me from family obligations every year to get to. And, I've done, maybe again, I'll maybe look at it next year. But not this year. I already have one that in July I'm doing down in Branson. Legends, that is. So I don't want to impose on the family part any more than that. So
no,
yes, I do like to speak in front of people. I like to keep it to 2 or 3 maximum because I have a busy enough schedule as it is. And
yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, I had remembered hearing, maybe it was even on our show. I was asking. You had another book that you were working on in the works. Is that still being worked on, or do we have any more news about that?
Yeah, the news is I'm being more selfish, and I'm making time every week to write on it and make the book progress. The flip side of the story, though, is, and it was, again, it's kind of similar to maybe a process I went through on the Genesis 6 conspiracy. I wrote 300 pages. And I stopped. And I didn't know why, but I knew I wanted to finish the book, but I didn't know why I shouldn't be spending more time on it, even though I have lots of excuses, lots of interviews, lots of social media, blah, whatever, all excuses. But the time out, what it did was it recrystallized what I want to do, which means I got to rewrite the first 300 pages and continue to finish at the same time, because how I was writing the book wasn't the way that it's been kind of made clear to me in the process here, that I have to address the audience in a way that is right for that audience. And how I was trying to do it more like in a Genesis 6 model, and that's not the way to do it. So I am working on it. It's totally going to be targeted at Christians in this book. And so it's about second Exodus and the end time, and how lost Israel and visible Judah, how and what their roles are in the end time. So I'm going to start it in prehistory and bring it forward, and then bring forward what happens in the end time. Because if you're going to understand end time prophecy, you need to understand the roles of Judah and lost Israel and the second Exodus. And that means you need to understand how that fits into rapture and Armageddon and all of the things Jesus is going to do in his return.
Yeah, I'm going to ask for a friend. Have you read the book, The World in the Bondage of Egypt, Under the Triumphal Arch of Titus? I'm asking for a friend. Have you read that in writing your book?
I have.
Okay, cool.
I have.
Awesome. Because I think those would go right in hand.
It's an awesome book, and I'll make sure I have references in there.
I love you, Gary. I love you. We're almost out of time here, but I know we kind of strayed off more into the personal thing, Gary, but
yep.
I've been finding myself more and more interested in the people whom God has called out to do the things like you have done, like writing these books, in getting to know their hearts. I think most of the people here, they look, I already told you, they look up to you and they respect you, but I want people to see your heart heard your interviews, and people get to hear the facts, the things that you've come up with. But I want people to see your heart and see that you have a love and a passion for your brothers and your sisters, that you've gone through much of the same things that they have gone, and to see that it's not ending. You're still going. You got more work to come, stuff to be excited about. You guys,
Prophecy is my true passion. So I've got several prophecy books to write, and I intend on doing that. And I've kind of promised the publisher that I do a sequel to the Gen 6. So I'm going to be,
you're going to be
more coming out
for the foreseeable future few years, aren't you?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. There's like 15 prophecy books in my head to write. It's just
I saw one fall out of your ear during the middle of the interview. It's on your left side. Okay. We have this quick question. Starla wants to ask it, and we'll probably leave it on this one because, Gary, I told you an hour, and I don't want to press you too much beyond what I've requested. The holy hand grenade question is this: who are the gods, angels of the four corners? I'm referring to the X within the circle symbology that Crowley referred to as the mark of the Antichrist. Do you have an answer for that, or do you have something you thought about?
I don't have a specific answer to who the gods of the four corners are. Typically, those are cardinal, directions in sort of a similar sort of application. So I probably don't want to speculate because, again, you'd have to have a name to attach to it. And I've dug deep into a lot of mysticism in the cult, but I'm not interested in learning all of the names of the particular angels. So the thing I would say, though, is that in every one of the pantheons, and they all have different vernacular names, all you're going to do is probably look down into that local pantheon as it descends in the male and the female aspect of the gods, and they're going to have the four winds, which are going to be representative of nature in terms of the winds that are going to be those same four gods. And that is a counterfeit of the four winds of prophecy, which come through in the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I have a great series on the four horsemen if people want to know what I'm talking about, that are also the four winds of not only prophecy, but of the metallic empires. And so when you're talking about that aspect of it, it's not an antichrist type of spirit, but it is more of an infrastructure type of God that is playing a role in terms of how the earth operates. So, but I can't give you the names because I haven't gone down in each pantheon to identify each of those names and those gods, and then looked all through the occult for the names that those gods would apply to. But it could be done. I haven't done it.
All right. One last question, and we're going to call it a night. You can answer this quick. Is the Enoch in the Ethiopian Bible the Enoch of Cain or of Seth?
Well, again, in the Ethiopian Bible, they talk about both. So
that's what I was going to say.
The Kebra is the Ethiopian version of the Old Testament, and so there again, you just be careful as to the details on it. So, yeah. And again, if people want, I said a couple things about First Enoch. If people want a document on First Enoch in terms of information on it, just get a hold of me. I'll send it to you, because I do like First Enoch a lot. But it's got a couple issues there that have markers in there that I think the translators purposely have put their markers in. And, example of that would be is in Enoch, it says that he lives to be 500 years old, and in another place 550 years old. And of course, we know Enoch, son of Jared, went to heaven at 365.
Right.
So we want to be careful, even with what First Enoch, even though I like it 99%.
Right. Well, I'm giving Chris or Liz, I think it's Chris in the chat, enough time to roll out the information they wanted. So you better get it out now, Chris, or Liz, because I'm about to end the show. But Gary, thanks once again for coming on and for discussing this chapter with me. I always appreciate you taking your time to speak with me. You're a dear brother, and we just love you. We'll be seeing you again. I think, Gary, we're going to try to get you again on the marathon interview that we're doing for Josh and Christina. So you guys will probably be seeing Gary again here real soon as Gary and I get the dates and time ironed out. But okay, so the new speaker announcement is me. Very funny, Chris. Very funny. Yes, I planned it on being there one way or the other. This guy, he's a funny one. All right. Well, we love you, Gary.
I would also encourage people that if they want to see me on a show where I'm just presenting a topic, I do a show twice a month for Josh Peck on
Daily Renegade.
The Daily Renegade, and I'm the Christian contrarian there, and I do a specific subject, twice a month. And so if you like that, go to the Daily Renegade, and you can watch me go dig in, deeper into a lot of things that I just can't get into the minutia on in the books or on interviews.
That's awesome. Also, for those folks who didn't know, Daily Renegade, not only the website Josh just created, he also has began Renegade Publishing. He has his first author who's published under the Renegade Publishing title, and he will be a future guest on the show. So I can tell you that. And everybody, we just love you. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks for coming out. This has been Disputed Lands. I'm Chad Schaefer. That's Gary Wayne. And it's been Monday night on Take on the World. Till we see you the next time.
Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside.